Welcome back. Thanks for hanging on in there with Neil Oliver live. Now, among much else we're discouraged from questioning is the notion that nothing poses more of a threat to life on Earth than you, me and the rest of the human race. Our dependence on oil and gas, we're told, will soon make life unlivable for all. Speaking only for myself, I'm not convinced, not by a long chalk, and it's a subject I'm keen to hear talked about properly. Joining me first of all this evening is researcher, commentator and blogger Ben Pyle to contemplate how worried we should be about the weather reports from the Med. Good evening, Ben. Thanks for joining me.
Good evening. Thanks for having me, Neil. It's good to be here and meet at last.
What do you make of these red and black and purple weather maps that were being shown about popular holiday destinations?
Well, I think you and Andrew put your finger on it a moment ago. This is marketing, changing the colours and hoping that people are going to buy this more attractive product or this more scary product because now it's got these sort of science fiction picture representations of heat, these purples, these blacks, these very, very sort of alarming colours. And this has been tried many times in different forms. We've even had well, climate marketeers, I suppose you could call them, and people, in fact, very much associated with the 97% survey that you cited earlier. They were trying to explain or explain the heat in the atmosphere that had been accumulated, as they claim, as the result of global warming in terms of nuclear bombs. So how many nuclear bombs of energy there are in the atmosphere, and similarly, a different group of climate activists and climate marketeers have tried to explain the accumulation of heat in the oceans. Not in terms of degrees centigrade or Fahrenheit, as most people, including scientists, would have understood, but in terms of the joules or megajoules, or in astronomical numbers, numbers that would take 24 places to represent. And these are all just different ways to try and make you more scared, so that they feel more confident in having conveyed their emotions to you. But underneath it all, these colours aren't science, and in fact the figures underlying the new colours aren't particularly scientific either. So whatever the temperatures are, unfortunately, different agencies have tried to interpret them in different ways recently. So I think there's the European Space Agency unhelpfully intervened by claiming that temperatures in southern Europe, the Mediterranean southern Europe, would be in the mid to high 40s, and then when everyone looked at the actual data, it turned out they wasn't. But these are people whose thumbs are, if they're not on the scale of the attempt to acquire this data, they're certainly pushing a bit too hard on our buttons in trying to make us interpret it.
As you say, am I right in thinking, I think it evolved very quickly this week, that the frightening figures that were being predicted, the figures in the 40s, it turned out, am I right in saying that they were satellite images of temperature of the ground surface, how hot the ground was to touch, in contrast to what is normally related to weather forecasting and weather reporting, which is the temperature of the air some feet above the ground. And that was how they were getting figures that normally start with a 3 to figures that started with a 4.
Well, that seems to be the case. It's unfortunately, because because a lot of the people involved are only very good at generating heat rather than light, no pun intended. It's actually been quite difficult for anyone to make any sense of it at all, because that clearly is the case that people have been using either novel ways of communicating these figures, or indeed using the ground temperatures, as you say, rather than the 1.5 meter weather station data, and it's all adds to the confusion. So it's nobody yet really knows what the actual temperatures were, whether there can be any inference here made about global warming or climate change,
bear with me.
And what we should really do about it.
Bear with me, Ben. Bear with me, Ben. Andrew Eborn, how do you react to that? This idea that we're being, it feels again like we're being nudged.
Yes.
Nudged to think something, that's in somebody else's interests that's not necessarily the case.
With all these things, you have to ask why we're being told it, who's telling us, and what benefits do they have as a result of doing it. It was Abraham Lincoln who said, if you say basically a calf, if you count the tail, how many legs does a calf have? The answer is still 4, it's not 5 if you count the tail as a leg. Tell a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. What we need to find out, and this is why I say get the scientists together, to what extent is any of this man-made? Because if it's not, there's certainly other causes, and we look at throughout history and those sort of causes, and maybe I can ask Ben exactly that question. Do you think man has contributed at all to this side?
There you go, Ben. What do you say?
Well, probably. That seems to be... There's good scientific arguments and good scientific evidence that CO2 is a greenhouse gas and that this will warm the atmosphere, and that warmer atmosphere may produce somewhat different climate. What I disagree with, what I think is important, is how that climate change or how that global warming turns into the climate crisis, as we've been warned is happening and is going to get worse. Because there's no evidence of that. There might be evidence of a slightly warmer atmosphere, and I stress it's slightly warmer, and there might be slightly different climate patterns, but we're not seeing a massive, as Neil's monologue really well demonstrated, we're not seeing a huge increase of catastrophic events of extreme weather. And in fact, what we do see is a massively reduced impact of weather of all kinds, including extreme weather, on us. So climate impacts over the last century have diminished completely. So in the heat wave, for example, in London in 1911, there were more than 1,000 deaths, mostly as a consequence, in fact, of spoiled food, which children ate, and then they sadly died of diarrhea because of the food poisoning. So climate interacts with the way we live our lives in very many different ways, and refrigeration was an innovation that dramatically changed that. So we were much better able to survive heat waves by storing food better or chilling the air for more vulnerable people. Heat waves really used to be a problem. It does
sound to me, though, as though, Ben, we would be relinquishing what control we have over our own well-being by surrendering fossil fuels at this moment. But, Ben, I've run out of time. Thank you so much for your contribution so far this evening, and it's a conversation I'd like to pick up with you again in the weeks and months ahead. Another break is here. Coming up afterwards, we'll be joined by environmental campaigner Donnacha McCarthy.